There are spaces in your life that you believe you understand completely. The geography of them is mapped onto your soul. The worn patch on the arm of the couch, the specific squeak of a floorboard by the window, the way the afternoon light cuts across the kitchen counter. You move through them on instinct, your body knowing the path before your mind does. Our apartment was such a space for me, a place of predictable comforts and established boundaries. And then there are moments, quiet and unassuming, that arrive and redraw all the maps, turning a familiar landscape into a strange and uncharted territory. For me, that moment arrived on a Tuesday, disguised as a simple question about dinner. Julian stood in the doorway between the living room and the kitchen, a space he usually moved through with the unthinking grace of an athlete, all fluid motion and easy confidence. But now he was still, framed by the white paint of the jam, and there was a hesitation in his posture that was entirely new. He was holding his phone in one hand, thumb hovering over the screen as if he'd been about to order takeout, a ritual we'd perfected over 3 years of living together. But he hadn't. He looked at me, his gaze direct but clouded with something I couldn't yet name. It was a look I'd seen more and more in the 6 weeks since Chloe had left, a kind of quiet bewilderment, as if he'd woken up in a world that was fundamentally the same but felt entirely different. "Hey," he said, his voice softer than usual. "What do you think about not ordering in tonight?" I lowered the camera I'd been cleaning, the familiar weight of it a comfort in my hands. It was an old film camera, a relic I clung to in a digital world, and the methodical process of disassembling the lens, wiping it with a soft cloth, and reassembling it was my form of meditation. "Okay," I said, my own voice carefully neutral. I had learned, in the weeks since the breakup, to be a placid surface for him, a calm harbor in his emotional storm. I was the keeper of the quiet, the provider of uncomplicated companionship. "What did you have in mind?" He shifted his weight, a subtle movement that nonetheless felt significant. "I was thinking maybe we could cook together." He said the last word with a slight upward inflection, as if it were a foreign concept, a piece of a language he was only just learning to speak. And in a way it was. We had coexisted in the kitchen, of course. We'd made coffee at the same time, bumping elbows in a familiar dance. We'd grabbed beers from the fridge, pulled bowls from the cupboard for cereal. But we had never once cooked together. Cooking had been his and Chloe's thing. It was their ritual, their shared creative space. I was the one who ate the leftovers, offering praise from the living room. The kitchen, in that specific way, had been their territory. Now, he was inviting me into it, and it felt like being asked to step across a line I had long ago taught myself never to approach. My heart, that treacherous and hopeful muscle, gave a painful thud against my ribs. I had spent years building walls around my feelings for him, structuring my life in a way that allowed me to be near him without letting the truth of my affection spill out and ruin everything. He was my best friend. He was, as far as I had always known, completely and unshakably straight. And I was, quietly and irrevocably, in love with him. It was a silent, one-sided arrangement I had learned to live with, a low, constant ache that I had accepted as a permanent part of my own internal landscape. His invitation, as simple as it was, felt like a tremor along a fault line I had prayed would remain dormant forever. "Yeah," I managed, my voice miraculously steady. "Yeah, that sounds good. What are we making?" A small smile touched his lips, the first genuine one I'd seen in days. It didn't quite reach his eyes, but it was a start. It was a flicker of the old Julian, the one whose easy grin could light up a room. "I don't know. I bought a bunch of stuff the other day. Let's just see what's in there." He disappeared into the kitchen, and a moment later, I heard the sound of the refrigerator door opening, the clinking of jars, the rustle of vegetable bags. It was a sound of beginning. I set my camera down carefully on the coffee table, my hands feeling suddenly unsteady. I took a deep breath, a silent command to my heart to behave itself, and followed him into the newly redrawn territory of our kitchen. He turned as I entered, and then he did the second thing that changed the topography of the evening. He walked over to the small Bluetooth speaker on the counter, tapped his phone against it, and music began to fill the space. It was not his usual gym playlist, not the upbeat pop or classic rock he listened to. It was the National. It was the album I had put on for him months ago, late one night when he'd been stressed about work, the album I had told him was my calm-down music. He had listened, nodded, and said it was nice, but he'd never played it himself. Until now. He was playing it for me. Or, a small, dangerous voice whispered in my mind, he was playing it for us. That was the moment the quiet, predictable architecture of our friendship began to dissolve. He had asked me to cook with him in a space that was once hers, and he had filled the silence with music that was uniquely mine. It was a gesture so specific, so laden with unspoken meaning, that it felt both terrifying and impossibly, beautifully hopeful. And as I stood there, with the melancholic baritone of Matt Berninger singing about sorrow and love, watching Julian pull onions and garlic from the fridge, I knew that whatever happened next, the map of our life together was being irrevocably changed, and I had no choice but to follow him into the unknown. To understand the weight of that moment, the sheer seismic shift it represented in the quiet continent of my heart, you have to understand the foundation upon which our friendship was built. Julian and I met in college, two disparate elements thrown together by the random lottery of freshman housing. He was on the soccer team, a whirlwind of kinetic energy, his room always overflowing with friends, laughter, and the faint, lingering smell of sweat and cheap beer. His door was, both literally and metaphorically, always open. He moved through the world with an assumption of welcome, a golden retriever in human form, all boundless optimism and an unshakable belief in the goodness of people. He collected friends like other people collected stamps, each one a testament to his effortless charisma. My room, by contrast, was a sanctuary of quiet. I was a photography major, more comfortable observing the world from behind a lens than participating in it directly. My door was usually closed, not out of unfriendliness, but out of a need to control my environment, to create a space where the noise of the world could be muted and I could focus on the subtle interplay of light and shadow. I was not lonely, not exactly. I was self-contained, a closed system. I had a few close friends, but I was cautious with my affection, doling it out in carefully measured doses. I had learned early that my feelings tended to be deeper and more intense than was considered normal, and I guarded my heart with a quiet diligence. We should have been oil and water, two ships passing in the fluorescent-lit hallway of our dorm. But Julian, in his infinite, sunny capacity for connection, refused to let that happen. He saw my closed door not as a barrier, but as a puzzle. He would knock, not with the boisterous pounding of his other friends, but with a soft, questioning rap. He'd poke his head in, a sheepish grin on his face, and ask if I wanted to grab a slice of pizza or watch a movie. He never pushed, never demanded. He simply offered his presence, an open invitation with no strings attached. And slowly, cautiously, I began to accept. I found that beneath the jock exterior was a person of surprising depth and sensitivity. He was fiercely loyal, a protector of his people. He was a terrible worrier, constantly fretting about his grades, his performance on the field, his family back home. The easy confidence he projected was a well-constructed armor, and I was one of the few people he seemed willing to let see the chinks in it. Our late-night conversations became the bedrock of our friendship. We would sit on the worn-out common room couch, the rest of the dorm asleep, and talk for hours. He would talk about the pressure to succeed, the fear of not living up to expectations. I would talk about the way a photograph could capture a feeling better than words ever could, about the ache of seeing so much beauty in the world and feeling inadequate to capture it. He listened to me, truly listened, in a way no one else ever had. He didn't just hear the words. He seemed to understand the quiet spaces between them. It was during one of those conversations, sophomore year, that I felt the first, terrifying tremor of what my feelings for him were becoming. He was talking about a girl he'd just started seeing, and he was describing her with that earnest, enthusiastic glow he got when he was happy. I was supposed to be happy for him. I was happy for him. But underneath the happiness was a sharp, unfamiliar pang of something else. It was a cold, hollow feeling in the pit of my stomach, a possessiveness I had no right to feel. I watched him talk, his hands gesturing animatedly, the overhead light catching the gold flecks in his brown eyes, and the thought hit me with the force of a physical blow. I want to be the one who makes you look like that. The realization was a silent detonation in the center of my world. It changed everything and nothing all at once. Outwardly, I was still his best friend, his quiet confidant. I gave him advice about his relationships, listened to him agonize over birthday gifts for his girlfriends, and offered a shoulder to cry on when things inevitably fell apart. But inwardly, I was living a double life. I was a cartographer of secret glances, a translator of casual touches. Every time his arm brushed against mine on the couch, every time he threw a casual arm over my shoulders after a victory, every time he smiled at me from across a crowded room, I would record it, analyze it, and then carefully file it away in the locked archive of my heart, a place labeled things that don't mean what you wish they meant. It was a painful, exhausting process, but it was the only way I knew to preserve what we had. The friendship was too precious to risk. His presence in my life was a non-negotiable necessity, and if the price of that was a quiet, perpetual heartbreak, then it was a price I was willing to pay. After college, we got the apartment together. It felt like the most natural thing in the world. He was starting a demanding job as a software consultant, and I was trying to make a go of it as a freelance photographer. We were two constants in a world of variables. He met Chloe about a year after we moved in. She was smart, funny, and beautiful, and she adored him. And he, in turn, was incandescently happy. I watched them build a life within our shared space. I learned the rhythms of their relationship, the sound of their laughter through the walls, the specific way he would say her name. I photographed their happiness, capturing it in sharp, poignant detail, my own feelings a ghostly presence just outside the frame. And I buried my own heart a little deeper, packing the earth down firmly on top of it, convinced it was a seed that could never be allowed to grow. Then, 6 weeks before that Tuesday in the kitchen, it all fell apart. The breakup was sudden, messy, and devastating for Julian. I never got the full story, only fragmented pieces about different life goals and irreconcilable futures. One day, Chloe was a fixture in our home, her favorite mug next to the sink, her scent lingering on the throw pillows. The next, she was gone, and her absence was a physical presence, a gaping hole in the fabric of our daily lives. Julian was adrift. He threw himself into work, into long, punishing runs, into anything that would exhaust him enough to sleep. But in the quiet moments, in the evenings when the silence of the apartment pressed in, I could see the loneliness consuming him. He would sit on the couch, staring at the blank television screen, his shoulders slumped, and he looked like a ship that had lost its anchor, tossed about on a sea of grief he didn't know how to navigate. That was the context. That was the landscape. A man whose world had just been shattered, reaching for a new kind of comfort. And me, the friend who had been quietly in love with him for nearly a decade, suddenly being invited into the very heart of his brokenness. The request to cook dinner was not just about food. It was about filling a space. It was about creating a new ritual to replace a lost one. And the music was about connection. It was a deliberate act of intimacy, a quiet acknowledgement that he saw me, that he remembered the small, personal details of who I was. It was a signal, faint and flickering, but it was there. And as I picked up a knife and started chopping an onion, my eyes stinging from the fumes, or maybe from something else entirely, I felt the carefully constructed walls around my heart begin to crumble, brick by painful, hopeful brick. The first night was a study in careful choreography. We moved around each other in the small kitchen, a space suddenly charged with a new and potent energy. I was hyper-aware of everything. The distance between our bodies, the way his t-shirt stretched across his back as he reached for a pan, the sound of his breathing over the sizzle of garlic and olive oil. My own movements felt stilted and self-conscious, as if I were an actor who had forgotten his lines. I, who could spend hours in a darkroom with the steady hands of a surgeon, found myself fumbling with a vegetable peeler, my fingers feeling thick and clumsy. I was a quiet observer by nature, but now my senses were dialed to an almost unbearable intensity. I was not just seeing him, I was cataloging him, absorbing every detail as if it were a clue in a grand, unsolvable mystery. Julian, for his part, seemed to be navigating by a different map. He was focused on the task at hand, his brow furrowed in concentration as he read a recipe from his phone. But there was a fragility to him that hadn't been there before. He was seeking normalcy, trying to build a new routine from the rubble of his old one, and he seemed to have decided that I was a necessary component of that reconstruction. He would ask me questions, his voice soft. "Do you think this is enough salt? Can you grab me the basil?" They were simple, practical queries, but they felt like anchors, mooring us together in the shared, tangible reality of the meal. He was grounding himself in the process, and in doing so, he was grounding himself to me. The music played on, a soundtrack to our tentative dance. He didn't say anything about it, and neither did I. It was a silent, shared secret in the air between us. At one point, a song came on that I particularly loved, a slow, aching ballad. I must have paused in my chopping for just a second too long, my attention caught by a specific lyric. Julian noticed. He looked up from the stove, a question in his eyes. "You okay?" he asked. "Yeah," I said, forcing a small smile. I love this song," he nodded slowly, his gaze holding mine for a beat longer than was strictly necessary. "I know," he said. "I know." 2 simple words, but they landed in my chest with the force of a confession. He knew. He had remembered. He had chosen it with intent. The knowledge was a dizzying thing, a rush of warmth that spread through my limbs and made it difficult to breathe. I turned back to the cutting board, my heart hammering a frantic, hopeful rhythm against my ribs. I was terrified of misinterpreting this, of projecting my own desperate yearning onto his grief-stricken gestures. But the evidence was becoming difficult to ignore. He was not just seeking comfort. He was seeking it specifically from me, in ways that were tailored to me. That first dinner together became a ritual. It wasn't spoken of, not planned. It simply began to happen. 2 or 3 nights a week. One of us would wordlessly start pulling ingredients from the fridge, and the other would join in. The awkwardness of that first night slowly melted away, replaced by a comfortable, practiced rhythm. We learned each other's movements, the unspoken language of a shared task. I knew he liked to have all his ingredients prepped before he started cooking. He learned that I was meticulous about cleaning as I went. We were building something new in that kitchen, a partnership forged in olive oil and simmering sauces. The intimacy of the kitchen soon began to spill into the rest of the apartment. After dinner, we would migrate to the couch. Before Chloe, he and I had our designated spots. He on the left, me on the right, a respectable cushion's distance between us. But now, the geography of the couch began to shift. It started subtly. One night, deep in a conversation about a difficult client he was dealing with, he leaned back, his head resting on the top of the cushion, his shoulder pressing lightly against mine. I froze, my entire body a live wire of sensation. I waited for him to pull away, to realize the contact and correct it. But he didn't. He just kept talking, his voice a low rumble beside me, the warmth of his body a solid, undeniable presence. From there, the boundaries blurred further. The light press of a shoulder became a common occurrence. Then, one evening, we were watching a movie, a mindless action flick meant to distract and entertain. He was exhausted, the stress of the past few months etched onto his face. Halfway through the film, his head, which had been lolling against the back of the couch, slowly tilted sideways until it came to rest on my shoulder. My breath hitched. The entire universe seemed to shrink to that single point of contact. The weight of his head, the scent of his shampoo, the soft tickle of his hair against my neck. It was an act of profound trust and vulnerability, cloaked in the plausible deniability of exhaustion. He was just tired. It didn't have to mean anything more. But my heart, reckless and foolish, dared to believe it did. I sat there, ramrod straight, for the rest of the movie, afraid to move, afraid to breathe, afraid to do anything that might break the spell. He had fallen asleep, his breathing deep and even. In sleep, his face was unguarded, The lines of tension smoothed away. He looked younger, more peaceful. I watched the flicker of the screen play across his features, and I felt a wave of tenderness so powerful it almost brought me to tears. I wanted to protect him. I wanted to keep him safe. I wanted, more than anything in the world, to be the person he could fall asleep on, the person he could trust with his unguarded heart. This became our new normal. The cooking, the talking, the slow, gravitational pull towards each other on the couch. The physical contact escalated in small, almost imperceptible increments. A head on my shoulder, his leg resting against mine. One night, he was particularly cold and pulled the throw blanket over both of us, and under its cover, his hand came to rest on my knee. Each new touch was a fresh shock to my system, a test of my self-control. My internal monologue was a constant, frantic debate. This is just friendship. He's grieving. He needs a friend. He doesn't know what he's doing. And the counter-argument, the small, persistent whisper of hope, but he's doing it with you. He chose you. He feels safe with you. Maybe it's more. I lived in that liminal space for weeks, caught between the heaven of his proximity and the hell of my own uncertainty. It was a beautiful, exquisite torture. I was getting everything I had ever wanted, but without the one thing I truly needed, certainty. I had no idea what was going on in his head. His actions were intimate, but his words remained firmly in the territory of friendship. He called me buddy and man, even as his hand lingered on my arm. He was sending 1,000 mixed signals, and I was decoding them in a vacuum, with no way of knowing if my translations were accurate or just wishful thinking. The anxiety was a constant companion, a low hum beneath the surface of our quiet domesticity. Every moment of closeness was freighted with the fear that it would be the last. I was terrified of making a wrong move, of saying the wrong thing, of letting my own feelings show on my face and scaring him away. I had become a master of repression, my face a carefully neutral mask while my insides were a roiling sea of hope and fear. I was a photograph, perfectly composed on the surface, but the developing chemicals of my emotions were threatening to overexpose the image, to burn it all away into an unrecognizable mess of black and white. He started leaving his bedroom door ajar at night. It was another small change, another subtle shift in the architecture of our lives, but it felt monumental. For 3 years, that door had been a symbol of our separate lives, a clear and defined boundary. Now, it was an invitation. A thin slice of light from his room would cut across the dark hallway, a silent signal that he was there, that the space between us was no longer completely closed off. I would lie in my own bed, staring at that sliver of light, my mind racing. Was it an accident? A habit he'd forgotten to break? Or was it intentional? Was it another unspoken gesture, another way of saying, I'm here. I'm not closing you out? I never found out. I never asked. I just accepted it as part of the new, fragile ecosystem we were building. An open door, a shared blanket, a hand on a knee, a head on a shoulder, a kitchen filled with the music I loved. These were the bricks of our new house, but I didn't know if we were building a home or a prison. I was trapped in the beautiful, agonizing space of the unspoken, and I had no idea how to find my way out. All I could do was wait, and hope, and pray that when the silence finally broke, it wouldn't be the sound of everything I held dear shattering into a million irreparable pieces. The breaking point, when it came, was not a violent fracture but a quiet, deliberate incision. It was a Thursday night, almost 3 months after our first cooking ritual. A storm had rolled in, a classic late-autumn deluge that rattled the windows and slicked the city streets with a dark, reflective sheen. We had made pasta, a simple, comforting meal, and were now entrenched on the couch, wrapped in our customary blanket. The television was on, but neither of us was watching it. The sound of the rain was the dominant presence in the room, a percussive, soothing rhythm that seemed to encourage introspection. Julian had been quiet all evening, a different kind of quiet than his usual post-work fatigue. It was a heavy, thoughtful silence, and it had settled in the space between us, thick and palpable. He was leaning against me, his head resting not on my shoulder this time, but tucked into the space between my shoulder and my neck, his face turned towards my chest. His arm was draped loosely across my stomach. It was the most intimate we had ever been, a position that felt less like friendship and more like the quiet, settled affection of established lovers. My heart was a frantic bird beating against the cage of my ribs, certain he must be able to feel it. I kept my own body perfectly still, my gaze fixed on the dancing, distorted lights of the city through the rain-streaked window. I was cataloging the feeling of his weight against me, the warmth of his breath through my t-shirt, the solid, comforting presence of him. I was trying to burn the memory of this moment into my brain, convinced, as always, that it would be the last time, that tomorrow he would wake up and the spell would be broken. I was so lost in my own internal world of frantic preservation that I almost didn't register it when he spoke, his voice a low murmur against my collarbone. "Leo." "Yeah." I managed, my own voice sounding rough and unused. He was silent for a long moment, and I could feel the slight tension in his body, the subtle gathering of nerve. He shifted, pushing himself up just enough to look at me. The dim light from the television cast his face in shades of blue and gray, highlighting the earnest, searching expression in his eyes. His gaze was direct, unwavering, and it held a vulnerability I had never seen in him before. It stripped away all my defenses. "Can I ask you something?" he said, his voice barely a whisper. It might be weird, this was it. The moment the ground either solidified beneath my feet or crumbled into nothingness. My entire being felt like a held breath. "You can ask me anything," I whispered back. He swallowed, his throat moving. His eyes searched mine, looking for something, permission, reassurance, I didn't know. He seemed to find it. His gaze dropped to my lips for a fleeting second, then returned to my eyes. The look was so full of a raw, unnamed emotion that it made my chest ache. "Would it be okay," he began, his voice trembling almost imperceptibly, "if I kissed you?" The question hung in the air between us, more fragile and more powerful than anything I had ever heard. It was not a proposition, not a move. It was a plea. It was a final, terrifying act of surrender to whatever had been growing between us in the quiet spaces of our shared lives. He was handing me all the power, giving me the choice to define the moment, to define us. He was laying his heart bare, a heart he himself didn't seem to fully understand, and trusting me not to break it. In that instant, all the years of silent pining, all the carefully constructed walls, all the fear and anxiety, it all fell away. There was no more ambiguity, no more need for interpretation. There was only him, his beautiful, honest, terrified face just inches from mine, and his question, which was really an answer to every unspoken prayer I'd ever had. I didn't trust my voice, so I just nodded. A single, slow, deliberate movement. It was all the permission he needed. He leaned in slowly, giving me every possible chance to pull away, to change my mind. I didn't. I met him halfway. The first touch of his lips to mine was impossibly soft, tentative, a question in its own right. It was not a kiss of passion or demand, but one of discovery. It was gentle and chaste, a simple, searching pressure. It tasted of salt and rain and a deep, profound relief. It was the sound of a lock I had carried for years finally clicking open. He pulled back after only a moment, his forehead resting against mine. His eyes were closed, a faint tremor running through his body. I raised a hand, my own fingers shaking, and cupped his cheek. His skin was warm. He was real. This was real. "Okay," I whispered, the word a breath of air. He opened his eyes. They were shining with unshed tears. He gave a small, shaky nod. "Yeah," he breathed. "Okay." And then he kissed me again, and this time there was no hesitation. This time it was a confirmation, a statement. It was a kiss that spoke of lonely nights and shared meals, of quiet comfort and unspoken understanding. It was the culmination of 1,000 small gestures, a conversation we had been having for months without a single word. In the shelter of our apartment, with the storm raging outside, we had finally found a new language, and it was one we both, at last, understood. The crossing had been made. We were on the other side of the river, and though the territory was still unknown, for the first time, I wasn't afraid. We were exploring it together. The morning after was a study in silence, but it was a different kind of silence from the one we had grown accustomed to. The comfortable, charged quiet of the previous weeks was gone, replaced by something brittle and sharp. I woke up first, my body still humming with the memory of the night before. After the kiss, we hadn't talked much. We had simply held each other on the couch, a profound sense of peace settling over us, until we had drifted off to sleep, still tangled together under the blanket. At some point in the early hours, I had stirred and guided a sleepy Julian to his room, a gesture so domestic and natural it made my heart ache with a fierce, protective love. I had retreated to my own bed, my mind a kaleidoscope of replayed moments, the feeling of his lips still a phantom presence on mine. I expected to wake up to a new world. I expected the morning light to feel different, the air in the apartment to taste sweeter. But when I walked into the kitchen, the space felt empty, colder than usual. A single coffee mug, Julian's, was in the sink. A note was on the counter, a small, stark white square of paper. My stomach clenched. I picked it up with a sense of dread. Hey, got called in early. See you tonight. Jay, no, buddy, no, man, just the cold initial. It was a retreat, a stark, formal step back from the breathtaking intimacy of the night before. The hope that had bloomed so brightly in my chest overnight began to wither, its petals curling in on themselves. I stood in the kitchen, the scene of our quiet revolution, and felt the familiar chill of loneliness creep back in. The music was gone. The warmth was gone. It was just a room again. The day was an exercise in torment. I tried to work, to edit photos from a recent shoot, but my focus was shattered. Every image seemed to mock me. I saw couples laughing in parks, families holding hands, all of them existing in a world of easy, declared affection that suddenly felt a million miles away. My mind was a relentless loop of self-doubt. I had misread everything. He was grieving and vulnerable, and I had let him cross a line he wasn't ready for. He had kissed me out of loneliness, not love. I was a port in a storm, a temporary comfort, and now, in the clear light of day, he regretted it. The thought was a physical pain, a sharp, twisting agony in my gut. He didn't come home that night. A text arrived around 7 o'clock. Hey, stuck at work. Gonna be a late one. Don't wait up. The words were professional, detached. The language of a colleague, not a friend, and certainly not whatever we had become the night before. I didn't answer. I just stared at the screen until the words blurred. I didn't cook. I ordered a pizza and ate 2 slices, the rest growing cold in the box. The apartment was cavernous in its silence. Every creak of the floorboards, every hum of the refrigerator seemed to amplify his absence. I went to bed early, but I didn't sleep. I just lay there, staring at his bedroom door, which was now firmly, unequivocally closed. The sliver of light was gone. The invitation had been rescinded. This went on for 3 days. 3 days of near total avoidance. He would leave before I was awake and come home long after I had retreated to my room. We were ghosts in our own home, our paths deliberately, painfully, not crossing. The tension in the apartment was a thick, suffocating fog. All the warmth and comfort we had built over the last few months had evaporated, leaving behind a cold, hard residue of regret and misunderstanding. My hope curdled into a bitter mix of anger and hurt. I felt foolish. I felt used. The tenderness I had felt for him was still there, but it was buried under layers of wounded pride. On the 4th day, I couldn't take it anymore. The silence was louder than any argument could ever be. It was eroding the very foundation of our friendship, the one thing I had always sworn to protect. I decided I would rather have a painful truth than this agonizing uncertainty. I needed to know where I stood. I needed to hear it from him, even if the words were going to break me. I sent him a text in the afternoon. We need to talk. Please be home for dinner tonight. It was not a request. He replied with a single word. Okay. I spent the rest of the afternoon in a state of high anxiety, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. I cleaned the apartment obsessively, scrubbing countertops and vacuuming floors, trying to impose some sense of order on my chaotic inner world. I didn't cook. I couldn't bear to be in the kitchen, with its ghosts of intimacy. When I heard his key in the lock at 6 o'clock, I was sitting on the couch, my hands clasped tightly in my lap, my posture rigid. He walked in and didn't look at me. He dropped his bag by the door, took off his jacket, and hung it with a slow, deliberate care that was completely unlike him. He was avoiding my eyes, his entire body language a closed-off fortress. "Hey," he said to the floor. "Julian," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "Look at me." He took a deep breath, like a man preparing to dive into icy water, and finally turned to face me. He looked terrible. There were dark circles under his eyes, and he'd lost weight. The vibrant energy that was so much a part of him was gone, replaced by a weary, haunted look. The anger I had been nursing flickered and died, replaced by a wave of my old, familiar concern. "What's going on?" I asked, my voice softer now. "Why are you avoiding me?" He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of profound stress. "I'm not," he lied, and the word was so weak, so transparent, that it was almost comical. "Don't," I said, shaking my head. "Don't do that. Don't lie to me. Not after everything. We were friends before any of this, Julian. You owe me the truth." He finally met my gaze, and his eyes were filled with a chaotic swirl of emotions. Fear, confusion, and a deep, gut-wrenching sadness. He looked trapped. He walked over to the armchair opposite the couch and sank into it, his body slumping as if his bones could no longer support his weight. "I don't know what to say," he whispered, his voice hoarse. I messed up. I'm so sorry, Leo. What did you mess up?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "Kissing me? Or ignoring me for 3 days?" He flinched as if I'd struck him. "Both. Everything. I don't know what I'm doing." He buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking. I'm not. I've only ever been with women. My whole life, that's just who I am. And then, with you, everything has been so confusing since Chloe left. You were just there, you were so solid, so safe. And I think I leaned on you too much. I took advantage of your kindness." The words were like a series of small, sharp cuts. Safe. Kindness. He was framing it as a moment of weakness, a temporary insanity brought on by grief. He was trying to erase the meaning, to file it away as an aberration. "So that's what it was?" I asked, my voice hardening despite myself. "You were lonely, and I was convenient? Was any of it real? The cooking? The music? All of it? Was that just you using me to feel less alone?" "No," he said, his head snapping up, his eyes wide with alarm. "No, it wasn't like that. I wanted to be with you. In the kitchen, on the couch. I just felt right. For the first time in months, I felt calm. I felt home." He choked on the last word. And that scared the hell out of me. He took a ragged breath and continued, the words tumbling out of him in a rush, a dam of confession finally breaking. "When I kissed you, it didn't feel wrong, Leo. That's what's messing with my head. It felt good. It felt more right than anything has in a very long time. And the next morning, I woke up and I panicked. Because I didn't know what it meant. What does this make me? What does this make us?" I looked at you, sleeping on the couch, and all I could think was that I had just destroyed the one good thing I had left in my life. I destroyed our friendship. So I ran. I thought if I could just put some distance between us, I could figure it all out. I could put things back in the right boxes. But there are no right boxes for this. And I've just been making it worse." He finally fell silent, his chest heaving, his confession hanging in the air between us. He looked at me, his eyes pleading, raw with a vulnerability that mirrored my own. He wasn't a monster. He wasn't a user. He was just a man who had stumbled into a feeling his life had never prepared him for, and he was terrified. The last of my anger dissolved, washed away by a current of profound empathy. I saw him then, not as the source of my pain, but as someone in his own, equally deep, pain. We were two people fumbling in the dark, trying to find our way. I stood up from the couch and walked over to him. I knelt on the floor in front of his chair, so we were at eye level. He watched me, his expression wary, like a startled animal. I reached out and took his hands. They were ice cold. "You didn't destroy anything," I said, my voice soft but sure. "You were just scared. I get it. I've been scared this whole time." A single tear escaped his eye, and tracked a path down his cheek. "What do we do now?" he whispered, his voice broken. I squeezed his hands. "We stop running," I said, "and we talk. For real this time. No more unspoken things. No more guessing. We just figure it out. Together." He stared at me, his lip trembling, and then he gave a jerky, desperate nod. In that moment, the fog of the last few days began to lift. The conflict wasn't over, not by a long shot. But the confrontation had cleared the air, replacing the poison of silence with the difficult, necessary work of honesty. We had found our way back to each other, not as friends, not yet as lovers, but as two people willing to face the terrifying, beautiful unknown, side by side. The conversation that followed was long and halting, a careful navigation through a minefield of fear and newly acknowledged feelings. We didn't solve everything that night. We couldn't. Years of Julian's self-perception, of my carefully guarded heart, couldn't be dismantled in a single evening. But we laid a new foundation, one built not on assumptions and silent yearning, but on the solid ground of open communication. He talked about his confusion, his fear of labels, his terror at the thought of what his family or his teammates might think. He admitted that the idea of being with a man had never crossed his mind, and yet, the idea of not being with me had become, in recent weeks, unbearable. I listened. I didn't push. I didn't demand he define himself or us. I just gave him the space to be honest, to be messy and conflicted. And I, in turn, was honest with him. I told him how long I had cared for him, how I had resigned myself to a life of quiet, unrequited love. I told him how the last few months had been both the most wonderful and the most agonizing period of my life. I confessed my own fear, my certainty that I had been nothing more than a temporary fix for his loneliness. Seeing the genuine pain on his face as I said that was all the reassurance I needed. Whatever this was, it was real for him, too. We ended the night with an agreement. We would take it slow, one day at a time. No expectations, no pressure. Just an agreement to be honest with each other and to not run away when things got scary. It was a fragile truce, but it felt more real than anything we'd had before. Before he went to bed, he hesitated in the hallway. He turned back to me, his expression a mixture of exhaustion and a tentative, fragile hope. "Leo," he said, I'm really glad you made me talk." "Me too," I said. He gave me a small, tired smile. And for the first time in 4 days, he left his bedroom door ajar. Just a crack. But the sliver of light was back. The days that followed were a process of rediscovery. We were learning how to be with each other in this new context. It was awkward at times, like learning a new dance with a familiar partner. The old, easy physical comfort was gone, replaced by a new self-awareness. We were both hyper-conscious of every touch, but now, instead of being fraught with ambiguity, it was filled with a quiet intention. The cooking ritual returned, but it was different. The first time we were back in the kitchen together, there was a palpable nervousness in the air. But then Julian reached for the speaker, and with a small, meaningful glance at me, he put on the national. It was a deliberate act, a callback to the beginning of our shift, but this time it felt like a promise. A statement of intent. As the familiar, melancholy music filled the room, I felt the tension in my shoulders begin to ease. We were reclaiming this space, redefining it as our own. Halfway through chopping vegetables, he reached over and gently took the knife from my hand. He set it down, turned me to face him, and kissed me. It was a soft, simple kiss, and it was not followed by panic or retreat. It was followed by a smile. "Just wanted to do that," he said, his cheeks slightly flushed. Then he picked up his own knife and went back to work. That's how we rebuilt. In small, intentional moments. A kiss in the kitchen, a hand held across the table while we ate. Him seeking out my hand to hold while we watched a movie on the couch, an open and deliberate gesture, no longer hidden by the plausible deniability of a blanket. The ambiguity was gone, replaced by a quiet, growing certainty. We were learning to speak our new language out loud. He was still struggling, I knew. I would sometimes see a flicker of the old fear in his eyes, a moment of doubt. But he didn't run. He would talk to me about it, his voice low and hesitant, and I would just listen, reminding him that he didn't have to have all the answers right now. All he had to do was stay. And he did. About a month after our talk, we were lying in his bed on a lazy Sunday morning. This, too, had become a new part of our geography. We had started sleeping in the same bed, a progression that felt as natural and inevitable as a river finding its way to the sea. It wasn't about sex. It was about closeness. It was about not wanting to be apart. It was about the simple, profound comfort of waking up next to the person who felt like home. The morning light was filtering through the blinds, striping the room in pale gold. I was watching him sleep, tracing the line of his jaw with my eyes, feeling a sense of peace so deep it felt like it had settled into my bones. He stirred, his eyes fluttering open. He smiled when he saw me, a slow, sleepy, unguarded smile that was just for me. "Hey," he murmured, his voice thick with sleep. "Hey," I whispered back. He shifted closer, draping an arm over my chest and resting his head on my shoulder. We lay there in a comfortable silence for a long time, just listening to the sounds of the city waking up outside our window. "You know," he said finally, his voice still soft. "I was thinking about Chloe the other day, my body tensed slightly, a reflexive, protective instinct." He must have felt it, because he squeezed my shoulder gently. "It's okay," he said. "It was a good thing. I was thinking about how, with her, I always felt like I was performing a role. The boyfriend. I was doing all the things I thought I was supposed to do. It wasn't fake. I did love her. But it was constructed. With you." He paused, searching for the words. "With you, I don't feel like I'm performing. I just feel like me. I feel like I can finally breathe." I turned my head and kissed the top of his hair. "I know what you mean," I said. "For years, I felt like I was playing the role of the best friend. The one who was always okay, always supportive. I never thought I'd get to just be me. With you." He lifted his head and looked at me, his eyes clear and steady. The confusion that had haunted him for so long was gone, replaced by a calm certainty that took my breath away. "I love you, Leo," he said, the words simple, direct, and utterly true. My heart, which had endured so much aching and breaking and hoping, finally felt whole. The word I had longed to hear, the word I never thought I would, was finally here, spoken into the quiet morning air. "I love you too, Julian," I said, and the words felt like coming home. We began to heal in the beautiful, honest silence we'd learned to create together. The spaces in our apartment, once mapped with boundaries and unspoken rules, became a single, shared territory. The kitchen was a place of creation and quiet kisses. The couch was a harbor of tangled limbs and easy affection. And the hallway between our rooms was no longer a divide, but a pathway. His door was never closed to me now, and mine was always open to him. We had redrawn the maps of our lives, not around what we were supposed to be, but around who we truly were. We had found our way out of the loneliness, not by following an old, established path, but by having the courage to draw a new one, together. The quiet observer and the unknowing initiator had finally found their way to a shared, peaceful, and beautifully understood destination.